Greetings digital world, welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you all are keeping well as we enter September. We're in the back third of 2022 already, and I can't quite believe that. Only yesterday it was January, so Jesus Christ, time is going quickly. Today's episode is a bit bittersweet, a bit melancholy, not for any terrible reasons or anything, but just because it will probably be, unless things go to plan later this week, it may be my last episode for a few weeks because I am going on holiday. And as I've learnt, when you go on holiday, you don't take your work with you. So I will not be dropping episodes for a few weeks while I gallivant off to Disneyland and Vegas and all these other cool places I'm going to go. I'm very excited. This was a trip that I had planned in 2020. If you are all familiar with the year of 2020, you know why it didn't go ahead and why it's taken 2 years to even get back to that point where I could actually go. So it is very exciting, but it means there will be no content for a few weeks. So for those 1 or 2 people who check in every week for my new episodes, don't be alarmed. I am not going anywhere. I am not giving up or anything like that. I just will not have anything to give you until I'm back in the next few weeks or so, which after that point, we'll get right back into it with our usual movie reviews, our TV reviews, our movie recommendations, our top 10s, our Marvel, MCU analyzations, all of that stuff. We'll be right back at it. But I'm just doing this little awareness / goodbye now because the new Pinocchio live action remake comes out the day before I go. So if everything goes according to plan, which I hope it does, if I'm lucky, I do intend on watching it and then dropping a very quick review of it before I go. But that depends entirely on Disney Plus releasing it, on the movie's running time, and whether I'm ready to go. Whether I have time, whether I'm done, whether I can sit back and actually watch the movie and do a review. I may not even be close to being ready to go. So we'll play it by ear, work on the assumption that it's coming, but it may not. Things may go horribly wrong and I just won't be able to do it, which is a shame because I'm apprehensive about this movie, that's absolutely for sure, after my disappointment with the Mulan remake. I have never been particularly keen on this movie coming either. The trailers for me have seemed very bland and lifeless, but then I talk to other people and they say, oh, the magic's there. And I wonder, I will say this, I wonder if it's because the main theme from Pinocchio is the Disney theme. Every time you watch a Disney movie, When You Wish Upon a Star plays with the Disney logo, which is from Pinocchio. So they use that music against the backdrop of everything you see in the Pinocchio trailers. So you hear that music and you do instantly think Disney, happiest place on earth, magic. But I don't correlate that music with the images I was seeing on the screen. It seemed very void of any sort of magic for me. But I don't know until I see the movie to say one way or another. I'd love to be pleasantly surprised. And all of this is moot because we're not even reviewing Pinocchio, so why are we getting into that? No, for today's episode, I had worked the last 2 weeks. I had planned, I rewatched all the James Bond movies because I realized I did my countdown to No Time to Die. I talked about all the different Bonds and all that, but I never did a top 10, which is surprising because of all the top 10s I've scraped out of the barrels to do, that would seem like the logical conclusion to that whole series, but I never did it. So I just finished over a week. I rewatched all 25 official Eon production James Bond films, ready to rank them. But then I thought, I'm kind of in the headspace for holiday. I have things to do, things to pack. I don't know if I have the energy and the dedication to give a good enough episode for all that work. I don't want to put in a week's worth of watching these movies and picking my favorites and then just half-heartedly go, this one's good, okay, moving on next. So that will probably be the first episode that comes out when I get back, which means this episode we're doing now is very much only come into my brain a couple hours ago. So apologies if it's short, apologies if it doesn't make a lot of sense, apologies if it's all over the place. That's just where we are right now. We'll just have to persevere. I decided I would pick a movie from my 100 movies bucket list to recommend so I can add to that growing playlist on my YouTubes. And also do that thing where I recommend a style of movie or an old type of film or a way of telling stories which people in today's times, today's society, may not have considered looking at or giving a chance. Specifically, we're going to be talking about silent films today, with emphasis on modern times from 1936 or 37, I think, starring Charlie Chaplin, which is probably my absolute favorite silent film that I have seen. I've not seen that many, but I've seen a fair enough amount to pick this one. Now, this is kind of like my review of 12 Angry Men, or when I've talked about movies like Seven Samurai. I understand that for a lot of people, there may not be any interest in these sorts of movies, these old movies, because basically what we're brought on now in today's society, in today's movies, we have a certain expectation to get out of those, the big blockbuster, action-packed spectacle thing. So it's hard to go back to these old movies which had a different way of telling stories because of what the technology was available for them, and be able to get invested in them in any sort of way. People can find them boring or cliche or cheap looking because they were made in the bloody 20s and 30s. And we're also in a negative way in this day and age as well, because there's so many movies now that exist. It's hard, I think, for movies to surprise us. Everybody always goes into movies these days, myself included, having seen everything, all the superhero movies, all the science fiction, the fantasy, the comedy, the dramas. There's been so many stories told that everyone's brain, when they see a movie, the first thing they always do is correlate it with other movies, other ideas, other ways of telling the same stories. Which means a lot of times a movie can be great. Its only major flaw being that they've seen it somewhere before, but as a result, that means the movie takes a couple of hits. But going back to these old times with the silent films, film itself was brand new. It's a brand new concept, meaning there wasn't people going to the movie theaters and going, well, we've seen this before. People were just marveling at the spectacle of what a movie was, the ability to take moving pictures and put them together to entertain viewers in that sort of way, for stories to leap out at them visually in a way that had not been experienced before. Rather than reading a book, you could see it in front of you on the screen. And film was this exploding concept in Hollywood and in the world at large. It was constantly being developed. It was being built upon. So every idea that came out, every movie that was made, every actor that got involved in movies, there was really only positivity in those early days, especially as film evolved from silent, soundless images to silent films but with music played along in the theaters. You had an orchestra or whatever playing the music along with it, to eventual evolution to talkies, meaning that you could capture audio within the film as well. Then black and white, suddenly you could achieve color. It was just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there was that sense of wonder and excitement, which I don't think you get a lot of more in Hollywood and in movies anymore. It's not so much the joy of telling movies and the excitement of new ways of providing storytelling. It's finding ways to make money, how to make the most money, how to monopolize. It's become a real business, and everybody's not so much starry-eyed anymore as jaded, which is not anybody's fault. It's just how the world has progressed. I'm not saying that Hollywood's terrible and we should all be mad about it, because I like a lot of movies that I've just said before are in contrast to what these older films were. It's more a recommendation for people who look back at this old time, these old films with the lack of sound, or the pantomime over the top acting, because people had to use their body language to tell stories rather than emote, where instead of big CGI and green screens, you can see the strings and wires, you can see the sets moving when the wind blows behind them because they're just cardboard. It's looking at it not in a judging sense, but in a, oh, I see, this is where it all began. And when you look at it, when you think of how it was to bring together all these pieces in 1936 or 1925 or 1914, whenever these older movies were made, to bring it all together and make something which had not been made before, then I think you see it in a different light, and you can appreciate its quaintness, its uniqueness, and it laying the foundation for what was to come after that. That's my biggest argument for anybody who's like, oh, I'd like King Kong, Kong Skull Island, or King Kong with Peter Jackson, but I'd never go back and watch King Kong from 1933 because the monkey looks silly. I understand. It's possible some people can't get past it. But for me, I look at that silly monkey and those cheap sets and everybody screaming and all of that, and I just go, oh, that's impressive. For what they were able to do, that's good stuff. And without it, you would not have the King Kongs that everybody knows now. And it's the same for anything. Whether if you love Star Wars had to come from those cheap sets in 1977. James Bond, everybody was nuts for No Time to Die, but it all started with a cheap-ass little movie made in 1962, which was not a big blockbuster action film that James Bond has become. It was just a simple spy thriller. It's understanding the evolution of film and appreciating it for what it is. That said, if you don't like it, you don't like it, but it's worth giving it a chance and looking at it in a different way. So to help people with that, to help them slowly delve into this period of cinema in different ways, that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So we're going to start off with Modern Times, which is the movie I'm recommending to everybody who wants to try a silent film and doesn't know where to begin. Starring our good friend Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was the king of silent films, in my opinion. There were lots of other famous actors alongside him as well, such as Buster Keaton. But Chaplin is the one that resonates for me a lot because he not only was able to take full advantage of the silent film prospect, a lot of pantomime, a lot of big acting, big action combined with comedy. He was able to tell stories with as little sound or imagery as possible. So with these older silent films, they had to every now and then cut to title cards to explain to the audience what was currently happening or what people were saying to each other. But in my opinion, especially with something like Modern Times, Chaplin used that to such little effect and instead relied on his big acting, his big arm movements, his comedic timing, the way he was able to use his silly slapsticks to tell stories. But at the same time, Chaplin also was very aware of the world around him. And every movie he made was a reflection of big issues or big turning points in the world at that time the movie was made. Modern Times, even though it's my favorite silent film from Chaplin, it's definitely not one of his first. He'd made a ton before he got to this one. This was a reflection on industrialization and the growing boom and how that was affecting the average worker. The powers up that be were getting all the money at the expense of the working class who were working horrible long hour shifts and living in squalor. So for this film, Chaplin plays his signature character called the Little Tramp with his little hat and his walking stick and his mustache, his Hitler mustache, I guess. And the movie basically showcases his adventures. He goes through a series of skits. There's a story thread that sort of strings it all together where he starts off working a horrifying job, gets fired from that, and then ends up making friends with a young girl who's also poor and living in squalor. And it's the two of them having a lovely relationship together, and Chaplin trying to hold on to jobs and avoid death, essentially, to get to a point where they can be happy. And the movie never really resolves that issue. It doesn't end with them having acquired the perfect job or a house or anything. It's more, it ends on them hopeful that no matter what happens, no matter how the world changes, they have each other and they'll be able to get out of it one way or another. If you ever see clips from classic silent films in old-time films and playing in the background or whatever, I guarantee you've seen a Modern Times clip, I apologize. Probably the most famous one being Chaplin on skates, rolling around on the second story floor of a shopping complex. There's a big hole in the ground, and he's constantly almost rolling off into oblivion, but he has no idea he's about to roll off into oblivion. It's extremely funny. Chaplin was a funny guy, and the things that he has to deal with, whether it's getting stuck in the cogs of a machine or being force-fed food on this new machine he's been strapped to, or being a waiter and getting caught up in all that shit as well. It's very funny, and it's very simple fun as well, which I really like. I can see a lot of what other comedians have built their comedy from this style of pantomime humor. You can see a lot of Rowan Atkinson, a lot of Jim Carrey in Chaplin's performance here. As Modern Times is one of the latest silent films he did, there is reference as well to the changing of Hollywood itself and the emergence of talkies, which was the combination of audio with film, so they were now able to make sounds in their movies, essentially. Which means Modern Times ends with this ridiculous song by Chaplin, which makes absolute no sense, which is both a compliment to his character in that he doesn't know what he's doing, so he's making it up as he's going along, but also in that we're in a new age here where you can hear sound in movies. You may not need to understand what the sound is, but just appreciate the fact that you can hear sound in the movie. It's not a long film, and I can't say too much about it because it's very simple stuff, but it's a delightful film and a perfect showcase of what a silent film was, how it worked, all the bells and whistles that went into a story telling this. Chaplin's pantomime acting, the title cards, the music that would go along with something like this. Because these silent films still had music, these ones that I'm mentioning here. It's a time capsule into a period of Hollywood that we do not have anymore, and I do highly recommend it as much as possible. Certainly check out any other of Chaplin's films as well. They're just as good. Modern Times, I think, is the best, but there's certainly some close ones. If you want to check out Chaplin, but you really can't deal with a silent film, then I'd recommend The Great Dictator. The Great Dictator is not a silent film, but Chaplin himself is silent still, if that makes sense. He's still playing a bumbling pantomime fool. He doesn't speak at all in the 2-hour runtime, except at the end where he makes a long speech, a speech about helping your fellow man and being a good person. But everyone else around him talks, including Chaplin. He plays 2 other characters, so he also plays a dictator in this film, so he talks there as well. But it's sort of like Chaplin is begrudgingly making the film, but still keeping true to what he likes, what he enjoyed doing in Hollywood as well. So it's worth. If you want to check out Chaplin, but you can't do a full silent film, check out The Great Dictator. There's certainly a lot to look into. I also would recommend for the diehard film buff fans who are listening to this, who may not have seen it, but the oldest film that I own is called Metropolis. It came out in 1924. It's hard to find. I've got it on DVD, but I got it as a gift, so I couldn't tell you where I got it from. And it's hard to actually see in its entirety, in the way that it was intended to be done. It's a German film, it's a silent film, and it's a story of definitely the same sort of themes as Modern Times, industrialization. It's a world where all the upper class live in their towers and very much at the expense of the working class live in luxury, while the bourgeoisie work 12-hour shifts and live in mines and are dirty and weep and all this terrible stuff. It's German expressionism as well, so where I said Chaplin used his pantomime to really sell the story, imagine that cranked to 100 and you get German expressionism in here. The story itself focuses on the son of the big president of this metropolis world, who discovers that even though he lives in wonderful bliss, the people below him suffer, and he has a conscience, he has a heart, so he tries to find a way to unite the people and make everything better. Meanwhile, along the side is this crazy scientist fella who's attempting to build a robot, and that robot, I know, has inspired a lot of science fiction that came after Metropolis, Star Wars especially as well. You can see it in here as well. It's very famous for sci-fi lovers. As I said, it's hard to see as it was intended. When it was given to me, the person who gave it to me thought it was a different version that had been cut down immensely and had actually been set to a Queen soundtrack, which, while I appreciate, I would probably like to see one day. The one I have is the most non-Frankenstein version of the film that you can get. All the surviving material. Unfortunately, with stuff like Metropolis and like old episodes of Doctor Who, some bits of film and episode have been lost to time and can never be recovered. So you will have moments in the film where it just has to throw up a title card to just explain what is happening in this current scene, because the film does not exist anymore. I wouldn't recommend Metropolis to a majority of people who just aren't interested in film and the history of film and where it came from, because they probably will not get a lot out of it. It will just be confusing and probably frustrating in certain instances too. But for anyone who has heard of Metropolis or is aware of the gold robot imagery, That comes from Metropolis, and I'd definitely recommend it. Give it a chance. For all my modern day listeners who are even overwhelmed by anything I've just said, but are intrigued to see the silent film portrayed to them in a way that they can access, I recommend 2 other movies for you. One is The Artist. It was a film that came out in 2011 that won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. It's a silent film, but set in a modern way that modern audiences can understand. And it showcases an actor who is very big in those early days of Hollywood, a big star of the silent films. Everybody in Hollywood loves him, but it showcases and tells the story of how talkies rose up in Hollywood, sound went into movies, meaning that he became redundant. He was big for silent films. He wasn't big once you could hear him speak and what he had to say. So while his female love interest in the film rises up as she becomes a big talky star, he becomes neglected, he can't get work, he falls into a deep sense of despair. For the majority of the film, it is done like if it were a silent film with big, loud musical accompaniment to what's going on, but title cards coming up whenever people speak. There is sound in the movie, but it is used in a very creative way where it sort of showcases, it's very slowly bleeding into the film, and it's kind of like a horror specter that's haunting our main protagonist because he's not a fan of sound, obviously, because it's ruined his life and his career. It's a very unique film, but it's very modern as well too. So I think anybody could appreciate that without being overwhelmed by silent films. I'm not sure about that. If you just don't want to watch a silent film at all, then fine. My last recommendation, watch Stan and Ollie. It is a wonderful film starring John C. Reilly and Steve Coogan, and it's a biopic about Laurel and Hardy and their exploits together, their companionships, their types of movies and their type of humor. It more focuses on their twilight years when they're no longer famous or relevant anymore, because, as I said, Hollywood was a constantly changing force in those early days. So for every Laurel and Hardy, there was another comedy duo waiting in the wings. So people were very famous very quickly, and then the next person would come along and take their place. So it's showing basically what happened after they were in the spotlight, when they became neglected and redundant, and how that affected their relationship and their view of the world. It's an extremely heartwarming film that is very emotional too. I personally love it, and I do say that if you're worried that if you don't know anything about Laurel and Hardy, you won't enjoy it, I know nothing about Laurel and Hardy apart from this movie. I'm aware of them as names. I've never seen a single Laurel and Hardy movie, and I love this movie. So that's about it. My final summary of this very hectic episode is I really love the history of film in Hollywood and how it has evolved from that first movie in 1901 called A Trip to the Moon, where a rocket flies into the moon and hits him in the eye. How it has evolved and changed so much. From 1901 to probably all the way to 2000, the way film was used and talked about and constructed was a constantly changing force. And each decade, I think, is a time capsule for how Hollywood was, how films were made, how actors were treated. The silent film is very quaint, it's very unique, and without it, there would be no film. Everything had to have baby steps to get to its next point. And if you didn't have silent film, you wouldn't have talkies. So I do recommend, give it a chance, check out some of these films because they're a lot of fun. I do say start with Modern Times, that's the best one. That's the one I started with, and that's the one that made me go, okay, cool, I'll check more of this stuff out. It sounds pretty good to me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. As I said, I hope to be back in a couple of days to review Pinocchio. Fingers crossed. If I don't, though, I will see you all in a few weeks after I get back from my holidays, when I will get right back into providing content for you all. As always, I thank you all for listening to me. I do appreciate it very much. I've got plenty of stuff here in the archives, so there's plenty to go back and have a re-listen to if you really desperately need to hear my voice over the next few weeks. I'm pretty sure you don't, so I'll see you in a few weeks when I get back refreshed from my holiday, ready to talk more movies and TV with you all. But until then, I love and appreciate you all as always. Stay safe, stay kind to one another, and I will catch you on the next Spliced In Later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.